بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على رسوله الكريم وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. So in this video, we'll continue our discussion on the two deviations, but I'm going to talk about the middle path now, right? The path that we should try to stay on, right? And not fall in those pits, right? So, I schematically I showed that path as like the path on the center, right? And then you don't want to fall in this pit. We want to stay over here, right? So, and I labeled it with Subulus Salam. Subulus Salam means the different paths to peace. This is a word. These words are in the Quran, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in one of the verses that Quran guides us towards Subulus Salam. So and even in Surah Al-Fatiha, right? When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Ihdina Sirat al-Mustaqim, right? He teaches us to ask guidance as the way of the people who were blessed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And in Surah An-Nisa, it has been explained that those people are amongst the prophets, right? Min al-nabiyyin wa siddiqeen wa shuhada wa salihin. That those are the people, min al-nabiyyin, the prophets, wa siddiqeen, the siddiq, wa shuhada, and the salihin, right? The pious people. So we want to stay on that path, right? And so we talked about those two extremes, right? We have to avoid not to be too rigid and not to be too flexible in religion, and those traits, right? So we have to find a subtle combination of the two, a subtle mixture that is okay. So we want some puritanism and some flexibility, right? Uh, and so this is what I'm going to define the Subul Salam as. Okay. The Subul Salam is the path, in the middle, right? Where, and this is, we've also been labeled by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as Ummatan Wasatan, right? The nation that is always in the middle. We don't go to the extremes, right? So um that's one of the meanings. There are other meanings, you can look up the tafsir. So the first thing is that one of the things that we have to make sure is that we have restricted alteration, right? So if there is something that appears to be altering the religion, right, we restrict it, right? How do we restrict it? We only allow, so in other words, we only allow alterations that don't couple with the fundamentals. Allow alterations that don't couple with the fundamentals. Now, what does that mean, right? So now this is where I'm going to discuss bid'ah a little bit. I'm going to make a separate video on bid'ah because it's a very important topic. So if we introduce something in religion, right? Because Islam is a religion that is going through various phases of human civilization, right? We, especially, in recent times, the evolution of human civilization has been chaotic because of the science and because of the emergence of science and technology and the industrial revolution, right? So we want to so if something comes in, if Islam goes into society, let's say, right, and there's something that society practices that is not part of Islam, what we're going to observe is that thing going to couple to anything that is fundamental to our religion, right? Fundamental, like the aqidah of the religion, or the things that are amongst the fara'id, right? The mandatory prayers, or fasting, right? Or hajj, or obviously not hajj, but zakat and other fundamentals, right? So let me give you an example. So in the subcontinent, for example, if you know the subcontinent, that's good. If you're not, there are some practices during the marriage, right? That when the Muslims went in there, Muslims conquered the subcontinent, especially the region we know as India, right, in the Indo-Pak region, right? there were some practices that the Hindus used to perform, right? And the Muslims, right, they modified sometimes those practices, sometimes they allowed people to do it, right? For example, Mehendi, it is a practice that they do before marriage. It's a celebration where they put henna on the body of the bride, right? So so the scholar said it's okay, you can do it as long as it's part of the culture. It's not coupling with anything. It's not modifying any practice. So it's okay. There was another practice called sati, um, where the Hindu woman would be burned with the body when her husband died, right? So the Muslims restricted that because obviously it's a severe practice. But other examples of this is, for example, if we go somewhere, right? Now this is a made up example, right? But imaginary example. But you would find this in other societies. So if, for example, someone goes in a society, right, and there are practices that if you bring into the Muslim culture, they modify, for example, the prayers, right? So, or we introduce uh, practices that modify the prayers, the salah, right? Like if you suddenly go to a society and people are practicing something right after the salah, then obviously that is something that's coupling with the fundamental one of the mandatory prayers. Then it's essentially modifying one of the mandatory aspects of the religion. And so we that is something we cannot allow, because that is going to couple with the fundamentals and start changing the religion, right? So we only allow alterations. This is what I mean. We only allow alterations that don't couple with the fundamentals, right? And so therefore, like, if a lot of these things that were introduced in the subcontinent, that were allowed in the subcontinent, right? You what that people like blatantly call bid'ah, right? That those were actually allowed by the scholars because of logistics, because of the reason, like the 40 like the morning after the 40 days, because at that time traveling was hard. People used to travel from far away places to for condolences for the person who died. So so at that time, the scholar said, okay, if you want to fix a day, and then this is I'm not making this up. I'm learning from this from my sheikh, who's a mufti, right? So so if they the scholars allowed this because it was not coupling with anything in the religion, and people understood that this is something related to the logistics. People want to express their condolences, so let's fix a day, right? So so that is why, blindly calling everything bid'ah is just, is something that is completely wrong. You have to look at what is the implications of this, right? Is it coupling with anything in the so this is why we drive cars. Like, I give an example, like the Prophet ﷺ, there's no evidence that the Prophet ﷺ sat on a plane and read the Quran, right? So then you're going to say, oh, reading the Quran on the plane is a bid'ah, right? Well, no, because reading the Quran is good, um and you can read it anywhere you want. So read the Quran while you are like doing dhikr, right? You can do dhikr on the plane, you can do dhikr while running, and no one is going to call that bid'ah, right? You can be creative in doing dhikr, and this is what the Sufis do. This is where our discussion on Sufism comes, and I'm going to continue this on in the next videos. Why do I think Sufism is part of our religion? And so, but I'll stop the discussion over here. The Sufis at this point, the Sufis are creative in dhikr, but only the dhikr that does not couple with the fundamentals, right? So let's stop at this point, and we'll continue at one more point, and we'll stop the video. Is the other thing is restricted Puritanism, right? Obviously, the both sides where we're falling in that pit, right? We don't want to do that, but we only allow restricted Puritanism also, right? We want restricted Puritanism. What is this restricted Puritanism? So we want to, like, as time flows, uh, there can be some additions. There's a possibility that people might add things to the religion that appear to modify the teachings of the religion. So we always go back to the fundamentals. And how do we go back to the fundamentals? Is we do purification that is guided. Now that's an important point, right? that is guided by the original sources. And original sources and you can, what do you want to call it, original scholars, original deliverers of religion, right? In other words, if you want to purify religion, you have to go back to what the original people who delivered the religion to the ummah. So, and by that, obviously, I mean the Prophet ﷺ, the Sahaba radiallahu anhum, the Tabi'een, the Tabi'ut Tabi'een, right? The Khairul Qurun, as we call them, rahimahumullah, radiallahu anhum ajma'een. So we want to go back to those original sources, and as well as look at the big scholars, right? The well-known scholars of the Sunnah. What do they say about a particular thing, right? So that's what I mean by anyone who decouples themselves. And I'll give a few examples of recent people who are trying to claim themselves as scholars, but they are not following restricted Puritanism. They're not following. They're not referring to the original sources. They're trying to so they're trying to reform religion through pure intelligence, through pure understanding of what is happening in recent times. And so they're trying to, this is what Sir Sayyid Ahmad Khan did, try to do when he was trying to sort of align the understanding of the Quran um with the times when we were subjugated by the British, right? And so he was trying to please the British, and he modified the Quran to please the British, and try to make the understanding of the Quran scientific, right? And so he decoupled himself from the original sources. And so that's the restricted Puritanism that we want. We want to stick with the original sources, and also the leaders of this ummah, right? And we can write that also. Stick to leaders, right? So that's it's a very important point. That's why I'm writing it. That we have to stick to what people who have guided millions in our in our history to the right path. We have to always refer to, like Imam Ghazali rahimahullah, like as a Mujaddid rahimahullah. What were they? How did they look at Shah Waliullah Muhaddis Dehlvi rahimahullah? All these people who were sources of hidayah for the whole ummah should be referred to. And I always say, when you go back towards time in religion, things get purer, people get more reliable. That's why if you go towards the source, like the sun, things get brighter, right? Our source is the Prophet ﷺ. As you move towards the source, people become more and more reliable. And people in our times are the least reliable, especially those who claim to understand without coupling themselves with the original sources and with the leaders of this ummah. And I particularly mean the scholars, not like the leaders, like the like scholars, right? So these are the 2 points that compose. There are other things also, which you can talk to ulama and get more knowledge. But this is something I've given a lot of thought. And if you think that there's some mistakes, I'm welcome for correction. But this is what I understand is the subul salam, that if you stick to this restricted alteration and restricted Puritanism, inshallah, you'll stay on this path. And obviously, always keep making dua. And I make dua to this Allah to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that we stay on the right path. So jazakallah for watching. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.